Where does truth come from? We've highlighted many times on this podcast the extreme silliness, the obvious foolishness, the self-contradictory nature that inheres in epistemological relativism. That idea that there's no such thing as objective truth. There's only your truth and my truth. When we make that affirmation, we are, of course, making we're making a declaration of an objective truth. We're contradicting ourselves. We're saying that it's objectively true, that there are no objective truths. But despite that foolishness, that ideology remains the dominant ideology in our culture, in our academic institutions, and it's pretty silly. But it's a much harder thing to answer the question, where does truth come from? Well, I think it might help for us to define truth. I would say that truth is that which corresponds to reality. Truth is that which is. And the truth, that which is, which corresponds to reality, has as its source the one who made all things and who thinks all things. That is, the source of truth is the God of truth. I want you to think about this for a moment. If there is no God, then you have a hard time being able to explain anything. Not only where does truth come from, where does goodness come from, where does beauty come from? Where does the universe come from? Where does design come from? Where did this podcast come from? Ultimately, we have to go back in the causal chain to, as Aristotle put it, the uncaused cause, or the unmoved mover. If something is, something must necessarily be. Something must have the power of being in itself. That is what we call God. Now, if there is a God, and God is the source of all other things, then certainly that must mean that God is the source of truth. But there's another way in which we can understand this. That when we say truth is that which corresponds to reality, we need to understand that reality is what is in the mind of God. Think of it this way. If relativity as a theory from Einstein holds that the only constant is the speed of light, which, by the way, I don't agree with that, but I do recognize I'm not anywhere in the neighborhood of an expert on this stuff. But if the constant is the speed of light and everything else is relative to it, well, in like manner, God is the constant in truth. You can embrace a kind of relativism if you say that all truth is relative to the thinker, and the only constant thinker is God. We all see things in skewed ways. Absolutely true. I have no quarrel affirming that. But God does not. He sees all things as they are, because all things are as they are because he thinks them. It is his mind, his eternal, infinite, immutable mind, which thinks reality. You can look at it almost like the Matrix, in the sense that all of reality is the fruit of the thought of God. Or you can think of it in terms of Shakespeare, that we are, that all the world is a stage, and all the people merely players who strut and fret their hour upon the stage, full of sound and fury, signifying not nothing, but signifying, that is, symbolizing, being the sign of the very image of God. God knows all truth, and we do not. God knows all truth accurately, and we do not. But we do bear his image, which is why we can know truth. Not because we're special, but because we're made by the one who alone is special. Where does truth come from? The same place everything else comes from. the God of heaven and earth.